In this lesson, lesson 4, we are going to look at Colossians chapter 1, verses 9 through 23. And specifically, we're going to look at the content of faith. If you have read any of Paul's other letters, especially the letter to the Ephesians, you will notice that Paul has a tendency to sort of do the same thing but differently depending on the context in which he is writing. There really is, in a sense, no such thing as a theology of Colossians and a theology of Ephesians. There's Paul's theology as he articulates it in these different letters. And what you realize as you read the letters all together is that theology is remarkably consistent. Paul is not changing his views from letter to letter. It doesn't happen. He is very clear on what he believes. He is very clear on what he is teaching, and he articulates that differently in different contexts. Which is really pretty interesting of a note to sort of realize that there's no sense in which this is a morphing or changing. He's not changing his story up, is what I'm getting at. He's remarkably consistent in his writings. And as we get into this section in this lesson, this new section of the first chapter of Colossians, we see that after introducing himself and Timothy as the writers and establishing the intended recipient, Paul is very concerned with the Colossians understanding that he has this great regard for them. And again, this plays into what the Judaizers are doing in the church. And you'll see this, well, you've already seen it when you looked at chapter 2, back in lesson 2. You already kind of have an idea of the problems going on in the church. And we'll come back and re-look at that section again as we go through the text. But it's playing into what the Judaizers are saying about him. You also see this in Romans, where essentially the Judaizers are saying to the Gentiles, look, the reason Paul never taught you these things and why he didn't come himself is because he's ashamed of what he's teaching. He knows he's teaching you the wrong thing. He knows he's leaving out all these things about the law. He's not giving you the full picture, and he doesn't want to come here. And it really is a kind of a disingenuous thing, and Paul is writing in large part to correct that and assure the Colossians that, no, I actually do have great regard for you. In fact, the whole reason I'm in prison is for your sake, but we'll talk about that in another lesson. So really in this section, the point that Paul is driving at, and the thing that's so important to see and understand, is that Paul wants the Colossian believers to understand that the knowledge of the gospel in which they have already believed. Remember, they learned this from Epaphras, right? The knowledge of the gospel in which they already believe leads to the knowledge that believers have gained an inheritance and a status of peace with God through the death of Jesus Christ. It is the bare basic, pivotal, central truth of the gospel. But Paul really wants to make sure his readers in the church at Colossae grasp this point. He wants them to understand that. And the reason for that, and this is very similar to what he says in Ephesians chapter 1 as well, he really wants them to understand that because he gets that sound doctrine leads to right living. Before Paul even talks about application, before Paul even discusses how anything he says is supposed to translate into their daily lives, he is very concerned that they understand correctly the theological truth of what has happened to them as a result of their faith in Jesus Christ. Simply put, he is concerned first and foremost that the Colossians have a correct understanding of what it is they believe before he expects them to live in a manner consistent with that belief. And it's a recurring concept in Paul's letters. The more you read Paul, the more you see he really has this disposition for people to grasp the theological understanding, to really get what it is they believe before he ever tries to bring in application or how this changes your life or how this is supposed to influence your day-to-day existence. There's a strong emphasis put on having a sound doctrine and a good theology first.